A bill in Congress would do something that sounds obscure, but would affect every federal agency. It would raise the long-standing dollar threshold for micro-purchases, goods or services agencies buy that cost less than $10,000. Those purchases come with fewer rules and are faster to get done. For more on why it matters, Tom talked with former General Services Administrator Emily Murphy.
It's great to actually watch this process. The Baroni Center, my colleagues there, we got together last spring and started doing research in this area about what would happen if we raised the micro-purchase threshold. We published our paper in June. We saw a bunch of small business trade associations latch on to that paper and send a letter to Congress then advocating for an increase in the micro-purchase threshold. Then last week, Congressman Burleson introduced a companion bill to a Senate bill, the FIT Procurement Act, and it raises the simplified acquisition threshold to $25,000. I'm sorry, the micro-purchase threshold to $25,000 and the simplified acquisition threshold to $500,000. That was marked up in committee last week and passed out. And so now the question is, can they get it across the finish line before the end of the year?
Because these types of matters tend to be important to and understood by certain members of Congress that like to get into the weeds and understand the complications of government. But for the big, high leadership and all their political aspirations for the next generation, they sometimes miss all of this, don't they?
Well, it's the little things that make the government work more efficiently. And we found that by raising the simplified acquisition threshold, the micro-purchase threshold, from $10,000 to $20,000, you're going to get about $30 million in savings. By going to $30,000, it would take it up to $45 million in savings. So we're somewhere in that mid-30s in savings annually that we'd be looking at with this kind of change. But more important, especially as we're at the end of the fiscal year, the thought that you could be able to get dollars out the door faster without needing a contracting officer to be going through the entire process for routine commercial goods. It makes sense. It makes the government more efficient and means you can spend money elsewhere rather than having to spend it on the procurement process itself.
Right. So if I need a new copier or some furniture and it's $10,500, right now I have to go to the simplified, which is not as simplified as the micro. Now with the micro, if I want to spend up to $25,000, should this bill become law, I can do it with a federal credit card, or I can do it quickly without a lot of rigmarole.
You could do it with a federal credit card. You could do it through the commercial platforms program that GSA established. There are all sorts of ways you could do it, and you could do it quickly. And you're still getting price comparison. And there's now you can even get small business credit under a deal that SBA and GSA signed around the commercial platform program. There's a lot of good to be found here.
Right. And how did you calculate 30 million savings? Where did that come from?
So we looked at the cost savings associated with using a purchase card, and that's about $70 a transaction. And there are a lot of transactions. We looked at the labor costs, the fact that right now anything above the micro purchase threshold requires that you have a contracting officer sign off on it, whereas something that's under it, you only need someone who's gone through micro purchase training. Doesn't mean that there aren't controls in place. Doesn't mean that it's just free money being spent by all. But it means that you don't need to have that warranted contracting officer. So it can be done by someone at a lower GS level, which then saves costs. And it can be done a lot faster. You're talking about a matter of days rather than weeks or months to make an award.
Right. And at this time, the end of the fiscal year, then, which we just got finished with, contracting officers, the warranted, the 1102s, are really in demand. And sometimes they're called on by other agencies just to get something through an 1102 at the end of the year. So the vendors would benefit a lot from this also.
Vendors will benefit. It also opens the door to bring in more non-traditional vendors, more small businesses, and to actually get them involved in the federal procurement ecosystem. And those that are successful in that, hopefully we bring them up into doing more traditional government contracting. There's been a lot written about the decline of the small business industrial base and the industrial base overall. This is a chance to bring in some new players into that market.
We are speaking with Emily Murphy. She's former GSA administrator, now a senior fellow at the Baroni Center for Government Contracting at George Mason University. And let's talk about the simplified acquisition, which is going under this bill if it passes to $500,000. What's the current threshold and what's the implications here?
So the current threshold is $250,000. And right now, if you're doing something that's between $10,000 and $250,000, you need a contracting officer. But under the simplified rules, you could go to, say, a GSA schedules, and if it doesn't require a separate statement of work, you could actually just review 3 price lists and then make an award. You have to justify it, document it, but it's a much, much faster process. And the 809 panel several years back went in and documented the amount of costs and savings associated with just being able to use simplified acquisition procedures over regular procedures. Under this new rule, if we go to $500,000, that dramatically increases that, the amount where you could do it in the simplified process. But what people forget is it's also going to be really good for small business, because under the FAR, everything under the simplified acquisition threshold is supposed to be reserved for small businesses if they can perform it at a fair and reasonable price. So this looks at also increasing the dollars that would go to small businesses.
Right, and this is covering services as well as goods, correct?
Services as well as goods, yes.
And is it only for fixed price types of items, or could you do some other kind of contract?
You'd probably be doing fixed price with a simplified acquisition threshold. It's simplified because you're not going to have cost accounting standards applying. These are fairly unnuanced contracts where it's very clear what the scope and what's being delivered is, as opposed to something that is going to be more complicated and you'd want a more innovative costing system.
And can these also be done without an 1102 contracting officer, or that you have to still find that person?
No, you're still going to need an 1102 above this. Anything above the micro-purchase threshold, you need an 1102. But because the process is faster, the 1102s can do it faster. There was a study, and this is going back 20 years, said that if it was simplified acquisitions could be done usually in under 3 months, whereas a standalone could take 9 months to do. I'd say that we've gotten much faster since then, so things under the SAT can be done a lot faster than that. You're talking about a question of weeks usually.
Sure. And just what kind of controls are in place to make sure that a small business that's offering something under one of the multiple award contracts or GWAC or something that was $250,000 because they knew they could get it sold under the simplified acquisition rules, saying now, if this becomes law, golly, now it's $350,000 just because I can stay under simplified.
Well, so that's going to reduce the cost for that small business, and that's a good thing. It's not going to put them outside their size standard. That's separate calculations to whether they're still a small business or not. They're still going to have to recertify to that as required by SBA. So it shouldn't create new challenges for the small businesses. It should create new opportunities for them.
No, what I mean is, though, what's to stop them from just raising their prices a lot, but they'd still be under the new threshold for simplified.
Because under simplified, you still have to look at other prices. So it's not being done in blind situation. There still is the ability for competition. The GSA's contract specialists are still going to be going in when they award the base contract, for example, and saying what is a fair and reasonable price, and making sure that they're doing the analysis. Also, another piece of legislation that got marked up last week was also the Value and Procurement Act, what deals with the basis of GSA awards and actually allow GSA to get even better at this. But that's a fun bill as well, probably for another conversation.
Right. They are fun,
but there's
too.
Plenty. Yeah, they are. There's no way that a small business could just go in and hike their prices because the SAT is now $500,000. You still have price competition taking place, and a business that tried to do that would find themselves in a lot of trouble pretty quickly.
Right, that thing would probably pop up in some analytical system and notify someone at GSA or whoever is the owner of that contract.
Again, remember under GSA's schedules, if you can't offer a price higher than your contract price. You can't sell, so you can go lower. You can always discount your schedule price, but you can't increase your schedule price.
Got it. In a practical sense, it's unlikely this bill would come to the full floor in either house. What are you going to do to make sure that it stays active as the transition and the election and all that happen?
So I think there's an opportunity, hopefully, for it to be included in the Defense Authorization Act or other legislation that's going to pass this year. There are several must-pass things that Congress needs to do. And if not, just even having members on the record supporting it this Congress maybe increases the chance that it moves forward next year in the next Congress. Although I'm still hopeful that it'll make it through before we start the next Congress.
Emily Murphy is a former GSA administrator, now a senior fellow at the Baroni Center for Government Contracting at George Mason University. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive, and you can hear the Federal Drive on demand. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.